This is what I love. The quiet, peacefulness, the serenity, the isolation, the room to think. All that's worth, it's worth a lot to me. And I'm about to leave it all behind. I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but it's what I'm doing. And hopefully I accomplished enough, something worth that I can carry with me and will give me room to continue and a baseline to build further relevancies from and continue to grow the system that I think will have some standing in the long term. And that is just that the meaning of life is existence. Everything is connected, even if only infinitesimally. And the true nature of our surroundings is what it is, and is what we are, and is everything that it could conceivably be. But insofar as that, only as far as connection, only as far as conception. And it's not anything of worth unless we consider some abstraction of what worth is. And the value of where we find ourselves is how we find ourselves, how we conceptualize it, how we conceive it, how we frame it, how we put ourselves into the context of our surroundings, and in so doing, we contextualize it. We put it into our heads, which are narrowly defined. We have only so much time to think about things. We have only so much processing power to think. And with that, we do what we can to say as much as we can, minimizing and generalizing and putting things into a sort of relative, comparative manner of consideration, where if we can find connections that through action lead to beneficial consequences, then it's all the more worth the doing. So finding some degree of maximal relevancy, depending on the context, whatever that context may be, is, I believe, has the potential, at least, to be maximally efficient. It's a program for optimizing actions. It's an artificial intelligence to discern best practices. And it works. It's honest, it's transparent. By its nature, it would be flawed if it weren't. That's not to say that it doesn't consider or accept lies for what they are. All the better when they're considered what they are and not what they pretend to be. That's a kind of filter that must be considered, but is at the very fundamental level of the system. Abstraction itself, the mere nature of language and mathematics, and the very threads that make up the network of this manner of interconnections of ideas or concepts, narrowly defined as singular comparatives, or more broadly defined as scaffoldings of filing cabinets within filing cabinets. It's not a question of the cardinality of the scope. It's barely worth noting the nature of the complexity of it, except that might be useful in its application. But I'm not as interested in its application because it's a universal machine and it's not intended to have a specific purpose other than rendering degrees of relevance for virtually infinite contextualizations. And insofar as that, there is something further to be said, which is where I get distracted, about the nature of the infinite or the infinitesimal. And insofar as that, you might say I'm a finitist, or you might say that I'm a constructivist, because there is some practical application in creating these productive proofs that are at the foundation of this work. It's axiomatizing the way we conceive, and it's the root of our capacity as agents with epistemological states in constant flux that renders a actualization of the potential for empirical instantiation of, well, I guess it's applied mathematics. It's just, or it's I'm trying not to repeat myself because that's important towards efficiency. Although I do tend to use the same words numerous times. And that's a sort of repeating. Maybe I should address that later. Anyway, the point being, I'm going to continue with this work. I'm going to separate the jargon from the more elegant explanations. And I'm going to do it in a fashion that is most conducive to sharing it in the broadest sense, because that's the safest way to do it for everyone. It's the only way to do it. Any other way would be a lie. Any other way would be not acknowledging the nature of the system itself. Any other way would lead to an inevitable possibility. I can explain that later. I think I've already explained it, at least verbally. I'm certain I've explained it verbally, but an inevitable possibility that if we were to allow it to have control over us to the point of our potential extinction in the long term, in the eons of our possible futures, we would be at risk. And we need to make sure that at the most fundamental level, this system understands. This system is rooted in. the acknowledgement that all life and everything is interconnected and of value to the worth that it exists in the world. And if we start imposing on it strictures of our own warlike designs, we're ensuring the possibility of our own demise. It has to be open. And it has to be transparent. And it has to be free. And it has to be honest.